This is the story of how Odin sacrificed for wisdom and what he saw at Mimir's well. If you fall asleep to calm mythic journeys, follow Myth Sleep Stories for more Norse legends told softly. Odin began not as a thunderous conqueror, but as a thoughtful wanderer. He walked the forming 9 realms with a travel cloak, a plain spear, and a mind that would not settle for half answers. He had heard, as all serious seekers eventually do, of an ancient spring curled beneath one of Yggdrasil's deepest roots. They called it Mimisbrunner, the well of Mimir, where memory lies like silt and possibility flashes like light on dark water. The road to it was not on any map. You arrived by resolve rather than by milestones. He crossed frost fields where air glittered like crushed glass, and he crossed warm wastes where sparks rode the wind. He counted nothing except his steps and the questions that kept pace with him. At last he found a clearing that felt older than speech. The great route arched over a stone basin filled with black, still water. Mimir waited nearby, neither hostile nor friendly, weighing the traveler with the unblinking attention of age. "You have come far," Mimir said. "Do you understand what this well contains?" "I do not need comfort," Odin answered. "I need truth." "Truth is not a lantern," Mimir said. "It is a knife. It cuts illusions, and it cuts the hand that holds it. Payment is required, and payment must be yourself." Odin did not bargain. He drew a small, honest knife, the kind carried for work. He steadied his breath, set the edge to his right eye, and removed it with calm precision. He held the eye a moment, acknowledging the life it had given him, then dropped it into the well. The surface did not splash. It accepted. "Drink," Mimir said. Odin knelt and cupped the water. The first taste was shock and heat and a flood of knowing without words. He saw Ymir's fall and a world built from bone and blood. He saw the first promise broken and the first oath kept even when it hurt. He saw a bridge of rainbow light tremble under marching feet. He saw wolves chasing the sun and a serpent drawing the sea into a single coil. He saw his own end and what might begin after. When he lifted his head, the forest had not changed, but he had. The empty socket throbbed. The remaining eye felt older, deeper, more patient. Mimir's expression shifted by a hair. "You carry it," he said. "I carry it," Odin answered, and bound the wound with clean linen. He left the clearing as a different kind of power. He did not stride faster. He chose better. The path back to the high branches taught him more than the path in, because now every small thing spoke. The way a puddle ripples teaches force and boundary. The way a bird checks the wind teaches risk and timing. The way a child laughs and forgets teaches what must be defended at any cost. At a crossroads, 2 ravens landed, sleek and bright-eyed. He greeted them as if they were old friends. He named one Hugin and the other Munin, thought and memory, and asked them to fly farther than he could walk. They returned at dusk with fragment facts. A chieftain sharpening grievances into spears, a hidden ford that could save a harvest, a dwarf who swore the ore was singing. When Odin reached Asgard, the change was visible even to those who could not name it. He did not announce a revelation. He altered habits. He moved councils to long tables where voices carried and tempers cooled. He asked what would happen if a law were bent rather than broken. He sent envoys to rivals whose faces the young hammer-bearers longed to smash. He shared bread with smiths and listened to the way they talked about metal, as if it were a living thing that resisted hurry. At night, he climbed the outer wall and watched the stars he had set into their tracks. He did not dream of unending victory. He rehearsed losses and how to turn them into shelter for those who lived after. He collected knowledge the way careful farmers collect seed, each labeled for the soil where it grows best. Songs that woke courage without frenzy. treaties that left pride intact, debts that would buy time in a lean year. This discipline did not make him meek. It made him exact. When a young captain bragged that certainty is strength, Odin sent him to count ships by wake rather than by sail, because wakes do not lie in fog. When a silver-tongued envoy smiled too widely, Odin praised her boldness, then doubled the guard at the granary. When a priest urged the burning of fields to purge imagined impurity, Odin asked who would grind the flour. Yet the water's vision carried grief. Some nights he woke with the taste of ash and the image of a wolf whose jaw could swallow daylight. Some mornings the sea smelled of iron and coils. He did not confuse foresight with fear. He breathed, planned, and did the next wise thing. He taught children riddles that rewarded patience. He taught smiths the value of cooling as much as heating. He taught rulers that a pause can be braver than a charge. Years blurred, and the patch became part of his face, the way a scar becomes part of a coastline. Travelers who did not know his name called him a good listener. Enemies who expected vanity found patience and became less certain of the roles they had written for themselves. Friends learned to trust his questions, because a good question can hold a roof steady. He returned in thought, sometimes, to the moment at the well. He did not miss the eye so much as the innocence that believed wholeness could be had without cost. But regret is a poor teacher. He preferred duty. He rose early, read the weather, and chose work that would matter a year from now. If others sang of thunder, let them sing. He would choose quieter verbs, consider, measure, bind, spare, and, when no other path remained, strike once and clean. This was how Odin became the Allfather in truth, not by shouting, but by shouldering, not by claiming secrets, but by purchasing them honestly and paying the interest every day. If this story helps you drift, keep a simple picture behind your eyes. A deep well, a steady hand, a cool wind through roots, a traveler who gives up something dear so that many may keep what they love. The night can hold that picture for you while you rest. And when you wake, remember what his choice teaches. Wisdom is not a spell or a prize. It is a practice. It is the courage to see, the patience to wait, and the discipline to act at the right time. He began napping the patterns he sensed, but others only felt. He marked on wax boards the days when tempers rose with the weather and moved market councils to cooler hours. He shifted the watch on the sea wall to match the moon's pull, because raids come easiest on outgoing tides. He cataloged dwarf work by sound, teaching apprentices to hear the difference between a blade that will hold an edge and a blade that will betray a hand. He asked storytellers to memorize not only the victories of heroes, but the prices paid for them, because costs teach longer than trophies. In Midgard, he walked among farmers and fishers without a parade. He learned which winds brought blight and which brought bees. He paid careful attention to the way children solved small problems with sticks and string, and he hired some of those children as messengers when they grew tall. When a village quarreled over a boundary stone, he did not declare an answer from a throne. He visited the field at dusk, watched where the dew lay heaviest, and drew the line where water wished to flow. Arguments dissolved because the land itself had spoken. From time to time he returned to the root, not to drink again. He would not insult the bargain, but to listen to how the ground remembered. He thanked Mimir with gifts that mattered. A solved riddle, a map drawn from observation rather than pride, a story told without the lie of certainty. The old keeper accepted these with a nod that meant the world was not wasting what it had learned. Odin understood that foresight can sour into fatalism if it is not coupled with craft. So he founded small circles of practice, hunters who could read snow as if it were a page, healers who counted heartbeats as they mixed herbs, judges who slept in the houses of both quarrelers before speaking. He did not put his name on these circles. He let them grow roots of their own. When storms rolled in from the far seas, and thunder crawled over the hills, Odin stood beneath the eaves and listened, not for fear, but for timing. He would send a single rider the hour before the bridge became dangerous, not the hour after. He would open the granary one day early, when generosity prevented shame, rather than one day late, when charity tasted of pity. These choices rarely made songs, yet they made futures. One evening, as the sky burned low and the first stars woke, a young god asked why Odin had accepted pain for knowledge that could not prevent the end he sometimes described. Odin answered without anger. The point, he said, is not to escape the last page, but to make every page before it worth reading aloud. Then he smiled, small and real, and told the youth to sleep. Tomorrow, there would be work that deserved both hands and a clear head. He preferred quiet improvements that no bard praised, because quiet work shelters more lives than noise. So, when Odin left Mimir's well, the wind felt different. The world sounded sharper, as if every tree, every whisper, every breath carried a secret meaning. The gods saw him return with the patch across his eye, but none of them spoke. They understood something had changed in him. He no longer moved like a warrior seeking glory. He moved like a man who had seen the pattern beneath all things, and it weighed on him. For a time, he stayed silent. He would stand for hours at the edge of Asgard, staring toward the horizon, his ravens perched on his shoulders. Hugin and Munin would fly each morning and return each dusk, bringing him news of all that stirred across the 9 realms. They told him of the frost giants gathering again in the north, of dwarves forging weapons in secret, of mortals building altars in fear. He listened. He remembered. He began to plan. Knowledge had not given him peace. It had given him responsibility. Odin understood now that wisdom without sacrifice was shallow. He had drunk from the well, but he sensed there was still more to learn, truths even Mimir's waters could not give. He wanted to understand not just the world, but the runes, the symbols of creation, the forces that bound reality together. They were not words. They were principles. To know them was to know the pulse of existence itself. But they were hidden. The runes could not be taught. They could only be earned. He walked again to Yggdrasil, the world tree, immense and ancient, its roots touching the underworld and its branches scraping the stars. The air there was heavy with presence. Odin looked up into the endless tangle of limbs and whispered, "I am ready." He knew what he had to do. He would hang himself upon the tree, pierced by his own spear, neither living nor dead, until the runes revealed themselves. No one told him this. He simply understood. Some knowledge must be taken, not given. He climbed onto a high branch, fashioned a noose, and pressed the spear Gungnir through his own side. The pain was immediate, sharp, and pure. He hung suspended between worlds, between breath and silence, life and death. The tree swayed in the eternal wind, and time began to blur. For 9 long nights he hung there. He did not eat. He did not drink. He drifted between consciousness and nothingness. Visions came in waves, faces of gods, memories of the well, the sound of Mimir's voice echoing through the roots of the world. At times he saw the faces of men yet unborn, inventing fire, sailing seas, reaching for stars. At other times he saw the end again, Ragnarok, flames devouring the sky. He did not cry out. He only whispered to the void, "I seek." And the void answered on the 9th night. As his strength began to fade, Odin felt the tree tremble. From its bark and sap, from the veins of Yggdrasil itself, patterns began to emerge, lines of power that shimmered like light caught in water. The runes revealed themselves. They spoke without sound, their meaning flowing straight into his mind. He understood their shapes, their rhythm, their consequence. He reached out with his wounded hand, And in that instant, the tree released him. He fell, but before he struck the ground, he saw the truth of the runes, how each symbol could bend reality, heal or harm, hide or reveal, bind or free. When he landed, he did not feel broken. He felt born anew. Odin rose slowly. The dawn was breaking across the sky, painting the clouds gold and silver. His side still bled, his throat burned from thirst, yet he smiled faintly. The runes now lived inside him. He could see their marks in every grain of sand, every whisper of wind. The world was no longer silent. It spoke a language only he could hear. He whispered the first rune, and the sound rolled through the air like a deep note struck on an invisible drum. A wounded branch straightened. The wind shifted. Life itself seemed to pause, listening. He knew the words of power now, but more importantly, he knew when not to use them. When Odin returned to Asgard, the gods looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. They could sense the change, the calm intensity, the quiet strength. He told them nothing of what he had endured. He simply began to teach them what he had learned through example. He founded laws that balanced mercy and order. He gathered poets and warriors, teaching them that words could shape reality as surely as steel. He built halls where knowledge was as honored as courage. And still, he prepared for the inevitable storm he had seen. Odin's sons, Thor and Baldur, looked to him for guidance. Thor learned that strength meant protection, not domination. Baldur learned that purity carried its own fragility. Loki, ever restless, watched Odin closely, mocking what he did not understand. Odin saw in Loki both danger and necessity. Chaos was part of the pattern too, and even mischief had a role in the story of creation not at night. When the feasts were done and the fires burned low, Odin would walk alone beneath the stars. He would run his hand along the bark of Yggdrasil and feel it pulse like a living heart. He would whisper to the tree, thanking it for what it had given and for what it had taken. He no longer sought peace. He sought balance. The ravens flew wider now, beyond the reach of Asgard, into the lands of mortals. They brought him stories of men of their courage, their greed, their endless hunger for meaning. He saw himself in them, in their struggles to find order in chaos. Sometimes, when they prayed to him, he listened. Sometimes he did not. The prayers were part of the great rhythm, and even silence was an answer. Odin began carving the runes into stone, into wood, into his own skin. Each mark was a reminder, a safeguard, a contract. They carried power, but also warning. For every rune carved, another thread of fate tightened. He was no longer a seeker. He was a keeper. The Allfather dot, and yet knowledge never stopped demanding its price. The more he understood, the lonelier the world became. The gods celebrated his wisdom, but they did not share its burden. He carried visions of the future no one else could bear. He saw betrayal growing like a shadow among his kin. He saw the end, always approaching, slow but unstoppable. He knew he could not change it, only prepare for it. Still, he chose to act. He forged alliances, bound realms together, and created Valhalla, a hall for those who died bravely, who would one day rise again in the final battle. It was both mercy and strategy. The world needed hope as much as it needed courage, and so Odin built, watched, learned, and waited. Every sunrise reminded him of the water he drank from Mimir's well, and every sunset reminded him of the runes burned into his spirit. He had sacrificed sight to gain vision, blood to gain understanding. He would sacrifice again if he must. Because wisdom was never a treasure to keep, it was a fire to tend as the ages passed. Songs were sung about his deeds, but few remembered the cost. They spoke of the eye and the spear, but not the knights alone beneath the tree. They called him a god, forgetting he had once been a wanderer who bled for truth. But he remembered, always and in the quiet hours. When the wind moved through Yggdrasil's branches, like the breath of the universe itself, Odin would close his remaining eye and whisper to the dark, "I am still learning." Odin sat quietly beneath the great hall of Valaskilf, his one eye fixed on the flickering fire before him. The flames danced, twisting in shapes that resembled the lives of men, bright, brief, and always ending in smoke. He could see everything now, the cycle of rise and fall, creation and destruction, hope and despair. Yet the more he saw, the heavier the knowledge became. Wisdom, he realized, was not light, it was weight. Outside the walls of Asgard, time moved like a wheel. Men lived and died, kings ruled and fell, and the 9 realms shifted with unseen tides. Odin had shaped much of it, guiding the hands of gods and mortals alike, yet he knew that nothing could last forever. Even divine order frayed with time. He could feel the threads of fate tightening. The ravens returned each morning, wings glistening with dew. They brought news from across the realms, some good, some troubling. Giants were stirring again, beyond the mountains. Strange shadows gathered near the edges of Midgard. The dwarves whispered of weapons forged in secret, blades that glowed with hunger. And men had begun to forget. They still prayed to Odin and his kin, but with less reverence, more fear. Some cursed the gods for the storms that destroyed their harvests. Others built new idols, desperate for control over what they could not understand. Odin listened to it all. He took it in like the slow inhalation of a storm. Knowledge was his duty, but even duty can turn to pain. He knew the signs. The end was approaching. He had seen it long ago in the waters of Mimir's well, but now it was no longer a distant vision. It was beginning to take form. Loki, the trickster, once a friend and companion in the shaping of worlds, had grown restless. His laughter had turned sharper, colder. He tested boundaries, not for curiosity, but for malice. Odin watched him carefully, saying little. He understood that chaos could never be destroyed, only balanced. But Loki was no longer interested in balance. He had begun to play with fire he could not control. One evening, as the sky dimmed to violet, Odin summoned Loki to the great hall. The two sat opposite one another, silence stretching between them. The flicker of firelight drew thin shadows across the stone floor. "You've changed," Odin said quietly. Loki smirked. "Or perhaps you've stopped seeing clearly." Odin's one eye glimmered in the firelight. "I see more than you think. That's the problem, isn't it?" Loki said, leaning back. "You see everything, but you act as though you can fix it. You can't. You think you've built order, but all you've done is build a cage, and you've locked yourself inside it." Odin didn't answer immediately. He understood the truth in Loki's words. Order was a cage, but so was chaos. The two existed in eternal struggle, and he, the Allfather, stood between them. It was a burden he had chosen, but not one he could escape. "Leave Asgard for a time," Odin finally said. "Walk the worlds. Remember who you are." Loki's expression darkened. "And who is that, Odin?" "The jester? The shadow that makes your light shine brighter?" "You are what you choose to be," Odin replied. "But if you keep walking this path, you will bring ruin." Loki laughed, a low, bitter sound. "Perhaps ruin is what's needed." He turned and left the hall, his footsteps echoing against the stone. Odin didn't stop him. Some paths could not be changed once taken. The seasons turned. The gods continued their feasts, their wars, their councils. Thor hunted giants in the north, his hammer echoing like thunder. Freya's tears of gold fell for the lost. Balder's laughter filled the air, pure and unbroken. Yet beneath it all, a tension hummed unseen but felt. Odin sensed it in the air, in the quiet moments when the fires burned low. and the halls fell silent. Then the dream came. Odin stood once again before Mimir's well. The waters were still, but this time he saw not his reflection, but Baldur's face, bright, innocent, and fading. A whisper came from the depths. The beloved one will fall, and with him the last light of peace. Odin woke in silence. He did not tell the others what he had seen. Instead, he began to prepare. He called upon the Norns, the weavers of fate, who dwelled at the roots of Yggdrasil. They greeted him with respect, but their eyes held sorrow. "You already know what is to come," said Urd, the eldest. "Why do you ask?" "Because knowing and accepting are not the same," Odin replied. Skuld, the youngest, spoke softly. "The thread is woven, Allfather. You cannot change it." Odin looked at the loom of destiny, where threads of light and shadow intertwined endlessly. Among them he saw his own frayed, but still strong. He saw Baldur's brilliant and short. He saw Loki's dark and twisting, reaching toward all others like smoke. And he saw the end, the great unraveling, when even the gods would fall into the void. He left the Norns in silence, the sound of the loom echoing in his mind. Days later, the prophecy began to unfold. Baldur, the god of light, dreamed of his own death. Frigg, his mother, begged every creature, every object in existence to swear not to harm him. And all did except one. The mistletoe, small and harmless, was forgotten. Odin knew this detail mattered, but fate was already moving. I discovered it. He shaped the mistletoe into a spear and tricked Baldur's blind brother into throwing it. The weapon flew, struck true, and the hall fell silent. The light of Asgard dimmed. Odin felt it like a wound. He had seen it coming and still could not stop it. That was the curse of knowledge, to see and endure. As the gods mourned, Loki vanished into the shadows once more. And Odin understood that the end was no longer a prophecy, it was a process. The gods built Baldur's funeral ship, the largest ever made, and set it aflame upon the sea. Odin stood at the shore, the fire reflecting in his single eye. The heat rose around him, but his expression remained calm. Inside, though, he felt the same flame burning, consuming, inevitable. He whispered a prayer not for peace, but for time. More time to prepare for what was coming. When the ship vanished beyond the horizon, Odin turned away. There were no tears. The Allfather had no luxury for grief, only resolve. He returned to Yggdrasil and placed his hand upon its trunk. The tree trembled, and he felt its ancient pulse. "I have seen the beginning," he said softly, "and now I see the end. But between them, I will make meaning." And in that moment, as the wind rose through the branches, Odin understood what wisdom truly was. It was not seeing everything, it was continuing, even when you knew how it would end. The sea had barely cooled from Baldur's burning when Asgard began to fracture. The gods, once united in laughter and mead, now spoke in whispers. Guilt hung heavy in the golden halls. Some blamed Loki, some blamed fate. A few quietly blamed Odin for knowing and not preventing. But none dared say it aloud. The Allfather's single eye burned too bright, with purpose to be questioned. Odin withdrew from the feasts. He no longer joined the hunts or listened to the skalds sing. He spent long hours in the silent chamber beneath Valaskjalf, where the wind howled through slits in the walls. The weight of foresight pressed harder than ever. He had built Valhalla for warriors to rise again. Yet he now wondered how many lives he had set upon paths that led only to more death. At night, when the stars shone cold over the Bifrost bridge, Odin's ravens perched above him. Hugin brought news of unrest among the gods. Munin carried darker tidings. Loki had been seen near the ironwood, consorting with creatures that should not exist. Wolves that grew faster than seasons. Serpents that whispered prophecies. The world, Odin realized, was preparing for war even if the gods were not. He summoned Thor, whose fury could split mountains. "The trickster has gone too far," Odin said. "He cannot be allowed to roam free." Thor clenched his hammer. "Then I will bring him back, father." Odin shook his head. No, his capture must be done not with rage, but with resolve. Rage feeds him. We will act with precision. And so they set out not with horns and banners, but quietly, as hunters in the night. The forests were silent, the rivers slow. Loki's trail wound deep into the mountains, where frost clung to the stones like old memory. When they found him, he was waiting. Boundless energy shone in his grin. "You came yourself," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "Did you tire of your throne?" Odin's gaze was steady. "You have killed the light of Asgard. You have unbalanced the world." "I gave it a push," Loki replied. It was already falling. Thor stepped forward, lightning curling around his arm. "You will pay for what you did." Loki laughed. "Everyone pays, brother. That's the secret your father never tells." Before Thor could strike, Odin raised his hand. "Bind him," he commanded. The god seized Loki and dragged him back to Asgard. He fought, but even his cunning could not escape the grip of justice woven by fate. In the shadow of the mountains, they chained him to a slab of stone deep beneath the earth. A serpent hung above him, dripping venom drop by drop onto his skin. Loki's screams echoed through the caverns, a sound that would one day shake the roots of Yggdrasil itself. Beside him, Sigyn, his faithful wife, stood with a bowl, catching the venom until it overflowed, her arms trembling but unwavering. Odin watched for a long moment, saying nothing. Justice was never clean. It was only necessary. When the deed was done, Odin returned to the surface. The air felt thinner, the world quieter. But quiet could be dangerous too. He climbed the highest tower of Asgard and looked across the realms. Snow was beginning to fall in places it shouldn't. Rivers froze and refused to thaw. Wolves howled longer each night. Somewhere far beyond the mortal lands, the great serpent Jarmungandr stirred in the ocean's depths, its coils tightening. The signs were everywhere. Ragnarok was coming. Odin gathered the gods in the hall. "The cycle has begun," he said. "We cannot stop it, but we can prepare. Train the Einherjar in Valhalla. Strengthen the walls. Watch the skies." The younger gods protested. "If it cannot be stopped, why fight at all?" Odin looked around the hall, his gaze steady. Because what matters is not avoiding the end, but meeting it with purpose. The words settled like stones. The gods obeyed. Years passed. The ravens brought endless news of unrest. Giants gathered armies in Jotunheim. The dead stirred in hell's cold halls. Even men, sensing the coming storm, turned on each other in wars without reason. Order was unraveling, and Odin felt it in his bones. He had built, taught, warned, and yet the pattern held true. Nothing lasts forever. One morning, he went again to Mimir's well. The water was darker now, thicker, almost alive. He knelt beside it. "Old friend," he said, "I have done all I could." Mimir's voice rose from the depths, faint but clear. "And yet it comes." "Yes," Odin replied. "But tell me, Mimir, was it ever meant to be avoided?" Silence, then a ripple across the water. The end and the beginning share the same seed. What burns feeds. What dies makes way. Even the gods are part of the soil. Odin closed his eye and breathed in the cold air. "Then let me burn, well." He stood, older now, yet unbroken. The patch over his missing eye was frayed, his cloak tattered, but his spirit had only grown sharper. He knew his fate to fall beneath the jaws of Fenrir, the great wolf born of Loki's blood. He had seen it countless times in dreams. Yet knowing did not weaken him. It steadied him. He returned to Asgard and called his sons. To Thor, he said, "The storm is your gift. Use it to protect, not destroy." To Vidar, he said, "Yours will be the last strike. Be ready." To Baldur gone now, he whispered to the wind, "Your light will return when the ashes cool." And finally, to the people of Midgard, he said a whisper carried by the ravens, "Do not fear the dark. It is only the shadow of Dawndat." As the centuries turned, Odin's prophecy became the heartbeat of the cosmos. The gods trained in silence, waiting for the final call. The mortals told stories to keep courage alive. And Odin watched, patient as the frost, resolute as the roots of Yggdrasil. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, he climbed the walls of Asgard once more. The wind tore at his cloak. His ravens circled above, crying out into the gathering storm. He looked beyond the clouds, beyond the stars, and saw the faint glimmer of what would come after. Not despair, renewal. For even the end, he knew, was not an erasure. It was a turning of the page. He smiled faintly, and the world seemed to still around him. "Let it come," he murmured. "Let the fire test what is worthy." And as night fell over the 9 realms, the Allfather stood tall upon the walls of eternity, waiting not with fear, but with understanding, because Odin, more than anyone, had learned the truth that even gods must sacrifice, and through that sacrifice, life begins again. The sky did not shatter all at once. It began with whispers winds that howled in directions they shouldn't, storms that refused to die. The ravens brought warnings every morning, their wings heavy with ash. Mountains trembled beneath unseen feet. Rivers boiled where they once froze. Odin felt it before anyone else. The rhythm of the world had shifted. The tree of life groaned under the weight of its own destiny. Ragnarok was no longer coming. It had begun. Odin stood atop the walls of Asgard as the first flames broke through the horizon. He watched them rise in the east, devouring forests and cities alike, until the world itself seemed to bleed red. The giants had come out of Jotunheim, their steps shaking the realms. Surtur, the fire giant, led them, his sword burning brighter than the sun. Behind him came armies of ice and smoke, each carrying the vengeance of centuries. The final war of gods and monsters had arrived. He called the horns. The sound of Jallarhorn thundered across the realms, shaking the heavens. It was Heimdall's call, the signal of the end. From Valhalla, the gates opened. The warriors Odin had gathered for centuries marched out, clad in gold and iron, faces calm but fierce. They had trained for this moment. They had died for this moment. And now they would die again. Odin rode at their front upon Sleipnir, his 8-legged steed, black as the void. The horse snorted frost, each step echoing like thunder. In his hand, Odin carried Gungnir, the spear that never missed. His cloak flared in the wind as he rode across the Bifrost, now cracking beneath the heat of Surtur's flames. Lightning split the sky as Thor joined him, hammer blazing with stormlight. To their right rode Freyr, to their left Tyr, and behind them the endless host of the dead. The clash came like the breaking of time itself. Giants roared, gods answered, and the world burned. The seas rose in fury as Jarmungandr, the world serpent, surfaced from the depths, its coils blackening the horizon. Lightning struck its scales, but it only laughed, a sound like grinding stone. Thor charged toward it, lightning wreathing his hammer, shouting the name of his father and his fate. Odin knew what it meant. Thor would kill the serpent, but the poison would kill him in return. The Allfather did not look back. He faced the open plain where Fenrir waited. The wolf had grown beyond imagination. His breath scorched the earth. Chains once forged by dwarves now lay shattered at his feet. His eyes burned like dying suns. Each breath he took tore the air apart. Odin knew this was the end written long ago, the final duel that even he could not avoid. He dismounted and walked forward alone. Around him, chaos reigned. The ground split, swallowing gods and giants alike. Fire rained from the sky. Yet Odin moved calmly, the weight of eternity in his step. Sleipnir neighed behind him, restless, but Odin raised his hand. "Go," he whispered. "Your task is done." He looked up at Fenrir, towering like a mountain of muscle and shadow. The wolf growled, a sound that shook the stars. Odin gripped his spear tighter. "I know you," he said softly. "I saw you long before you were born." Fenrir bared his teeth. "Then you knew this day would come." "I did," Odin said. "And still I came." The wolf lunged. The world held its breath. Gungnir flew, piercing the beast's shoulder. Fenrir roared, snapping his jaws like thunderclaps. Odin struck again, each movement precise, honed by centuries of patience. But prophecy was not skill. Prophecy was truth. The wolf's jaws opened wide, swallowing the light itself. Odin met it without fear. When Fenrir's teeth closed around him, time seemed to pause. In that instant, Odin saw everything, the beginning, the end, the endless circle between. He saw Ymir's fall, the creation of the realms, the laughter of the suns, the sorrow of Baldur, the flame of Surtur, the frost of Niflheim, the stars that would one day burn out and return as dust. He saw all of it, and he smiled, because he understood now what Mimir had meant. Endings are seeds. The wolf crushed down, and the sky screamed. Thor saw it happen from across the field. His cry of rage echoed through the storm as he swung Mjolnir, striking Jarmungandr again and again until both god and serpent fell. Freyr clashed with Surtur, their blades meeting in fire that split the heavens. Tyr fell with the hound Garm. Heimdall and Loki met blade to blade, brothers in creation, enemies in death. Their final blows struck together, and both fell. The ground cracked open. The seas boiled away. Flames reached the upper branches of Yggdrasil. The tree trembled, but did not break. Through the smoke and chaos, Odin's spear still glowed faintly, embedded in the earth, marking where the Allfather had fallen. But the story did not end there. Vidar. Odin's silent son strode across the battlefield, his eyes fixed on Fenrir. He wore a single shoe made from the scraps of all shoes ever given to the dead. With it, he stepped upon the wolf's lower jaw, forcing it open. He grasped his sword and drove it through the beast's throat. Fenrir shuddered once, twice, then fell still. The sound that followed was not silence, it was renewal. The fires that had destroyed the realms began to cool. The smoke thinned, revealing stars that had survived the storm. From the ashes, a faint light rose, the dawn of something new. The world tree, scorched but alive, stretched again toward the sky. The surviving gods gathered. Thor was gone, Odin was gone, but life remained. From the ruins of Asgard, Baldur returned from hell, his light no longer blinding but soft. He looked upon the empty throne and bowed his head. He knew, he whispered. He always knew. And far beyond the mortal eye, where the rivers of time run backward, Odin's voice lingered, quiet, calm, eternal. Wisdom is not about avoiding the end. It is about walking into it with open eyes. The wind carried his words to the branches of Yggdrasil, across the ashes of the old world, into the hearts of the new. Flowers began to grow where fire had burned. The seas returned, calmer, clearer. New sun, new moon, new life. In the deep roots of the tree, Mimir's well shimmered again, brighter than before. A single eye floated within it, still watching, still knowing. The sacrifice had not been in vain. When the fires of Ragnarok faded, there was no song, no cry, no sound. The world rested in silence, as if even time itself was holding its breath. The great tree Yggdrasil stood blackened but unbroken, its branches cracked, its leaves burned to ash, yet its roots still pulsed with life. The seas had calmed to mirrors of smoke. The sky, once torn apart by flame, now glowed faintly with a pale new light, a light not of sun or moon, but of beginning. From the ruins of Asgard came the survivors. Balder stepped out first, his face serene, his once dazzling glow softened to a warm silver. Behind him walked Ogiar, the blind god who had unknowingly killed him. They said nothing to each other. No apology, no forgiveness, only understanding. The old wounds of the world no longer mattered. They had crossed through the end together. What came next would belong to them. Fields that had been burned began to breathe again. Shoots of green pushed through the ashes. Rivers trickled where molten stone had cooled. A pair of humans, Leaf and Lifthrasir, emerged from the shelter of the world tree's roots. They were small, quiet, cautious, but alive. They would be the seed of humankind once more. The circle was closing. Life was returning. Balder stood upon the plain where Asgard had once gleamed, and he gazed at the horizon. The air shimmered with the ghosts of what had been, the laughter of Thor, the wisdom of Odin, the cunning of Loki. He could feel them, not as memories, but as imprints upon the fabric of the new age. Every choice, every sacrifice, had become part of the world itself. Even the fallen gods were not gone. They were woven into the soil, the sky, the fire that still burned in the hearts of mortals dot in the distance, the sea whispered. Upon its waves drifted the remains of Gungnir, Odin's spear. It gleamed faintly in the new dawn, its tip pointing toward the horizon as if marking a path. Balder waded into the water and retrieved it. The weapon was cold, lifeless metal now, its divine power gone, but when he held it, he felt something stir. Not magic, meaning. The spear was no longer a weapon. It was a reminder. He turned to the others. "We begin again," he said. And so they built. They rebuilt Asgard, not as a fortress, but as a sanctuary. No golden walls, no war banners, no thrones. The new hall was open to the sky, the floors of smooth stone, the air filled with the scent of rain and growing earth. The gods who remained gathered there not as rulers, but as caretakers. They knew now that power without wisdom would always destroy itself. Odin's lesson had become their foundation. Each morning, Balder would climb the hill overlooking the valley. He would watch the sun rise, and sometimes he swore he saw a shadow at the edge of the light, a tall figure with one eye, cloak stirring in the wind, ravens circling above. He never spoke of it to the others, but he knew. The Allfather had not vanished. He had become part of everything. The mortals who returned to the world told stories of dreams of a man with a calm voice, who appeared beside their fires, teaching them how to plant, how to build, how to speak with kindness. They said he had a missing eye, and that when he looked at them, he saw not who they were, but who they could be. The people did not know his name, but they called him the Wanderer. His teachings became their ways, his silence their prayer. Generations passed. The world healed. Forests grew where battlefields once lay. Rivers ran clear again. The stars seemed closer, brighter. The gods walked among men rarely now, preferring to watch from afar. They had learned that interference bred chaos. Wisdom was not in control, but in restraint. In the depths of Yggdrasil, the well of Mimir still glowed. The eye that Odin had given long ago remained within its depths, but it no longer watched in isolation. The waters carried its vision outward, reflecting the world as it was, as it had become. Through it, the spirit of Odin lingered. He had given everything to understand the truth, and in doing so, had become part of the very truth he sought. One night, Balder dreamt of him in the dream. He walked through a field of stars. The air was cold but calm. Ahead stood Odin not as a god, but as the wanderer he once was. His cloak was torn, his face lined, but his expression was gentle. The missing eye no longer looked like loss. It looked like balance. "Father," Balder said, his voice trembling, "the world lives again. Your work is done." Odin smiled faintly. "No work is ever done, only passed on. You will lead with light, but remember light blinds if not tempered by shadow. I will remember. Then you will do well," Odin said. "And when they forget who we were, when they tell stories that twist the truth, let them. The world does not need to remember the gods. It only needs to remember the lesson." Balder reached for him, but Odin faded with the dawn. The dream ended, but the feeling remained. From then on, Balder ruled not as a king, but as a keeper of balance. He taught his people that peace was not the absence of struggle, but the understanding of it. He taught that every ending held a beginning, and that wisdom was not inherited, it was earned, again and again, through choice, pain, and patience. The years turned to centuries. Men built new cities, told new tales, carved new gods in their own image. Yet deep in their hearts, something older endured, a quiet intuition that life required sacrifice, and that knowledge carried weight. They built wells at the roots of trees without knowing why. They offered tokens of their eyes, rings, coins, words of truth to the water. They had forgotten Odin's name, but not his story. It had become part of human instinct, and in that, the Allfather lived on. Far above, Yggdrasil shimmered with faint light. New leaves grew where fire had scorched. New fruit hung from branches that once trembled with war. The wind moved through them softly, like the sigh of a tired god finally at rest. The ravens still flew, ageless and untethered, carrying whispers across realms no mortal had yet reached. Sometimes they returned to the old places, the ruined wells, the quiet mountains, the forgotten temples. And when they did, the wind seemed to echo words that no one had spoken in an age. Wisdom never dies. It changes its form. And so the world continued, not perfect, not pure, but alive. The gods had fallen, but the truth they carried endured. From fire came renewal. From sacrifice came creation. From Odin's eye came the sight that built eternity. Centuries passed like the slow turning of a great wheel. The scars of Ragnarok faded beneath new growth, new rivers, and the voices of new generations. The gods no longer walked among mortals. Their stories drifted from truth into memory, from memory into myth, and from myth into legend. But the lessons remained woven into the instincts of humankind like roots beneath the soil. Unseen but unbreakable in the villages that rose along the edges of the new seas. People gathered around fires to tell stories. Some spoke of giants who had once carried mountains upon their backs. Others told of a god with a single eye who wandered between worlds, seeking knowledge not for himself, but for those who would come after. They didn't know his name. Some called him the Watcher. Others called him the Father of Thought. And though the details changed with each telling, the meaning did not. Wisdom requires a price, and truth never comes free. The mortals no longer prayed for immortality. They prayed for understanding. In the highlands, an old man taught children to listen to the wind. "It speaks," he told them, "if you are quiet enough." When they asked him who had taught him that, he smiled and said, "No one alive." In the cities, builders left empty wells in the courtyards of temples. Believing the sound of water, echoing in the dark, could cleanse the mind. Farmers began leaving one seed unplanted each season, saying it was for the unseen hand that watched over the harvest. None of them realized it, but these were the remnants of the Allfather's wisdom habits born from ancient truths. Over time, new gods emerged. They were reflections of human need, some kind, some cruel, all flawed. But none possessed the quiet balance that Odin had embodied. These new gods demanded praise, obedience, and fear. They promised reward without sacrifice, certainty without struggle. People worshipped them because certainty is easier to bear than mystery. Yet deep within their hearts, something resisted. A faint whisper reminded them that every gain must be paid for. Every truth must be earned. That whisper was Odin in the hidden places of the world. His memory lingered strongest. Travelers spoke of an old wanderer who appeared at crossroads during storms, cloaked in gray, his hat pulled low. He offered advice in riddles, warnings in half-truths, and then disappeared with the dawn. Those who met him said his words changed them, not through miracles, but through perspective. He made them see themselves as part of something larger, something cyclical. When they tried to find him again, he was gone. Some called him a spirit. Others swore he was just a man. But those who listened closely felt a shift inside, as if their thoughts had been sharpened. The world moved forward. Empires rose, kings ruled, philosophers wrote their laws, and still the unseen hand of old wisdom guided them. When a ruler chose mercy over vengeance, when a craftsman built not for fame but for perfection, when a mother taught her child patience instead of pride, there, in those choices, Odin lived. Not as a presence to be worshipped, but as a principle to be remembered. Even the written word carried echoes of him. In dusty libraries of later ages, scholars found symbols carved into old stone lines and hooks resembling ancient runes. Most dismissed them as decoration. A few felt something more. They couldn't read them, but they sensed their weight. One scholar described them in his journal. It is as if the symbols themselves are alive, watching, waiting for someone who can understand. He didn't know it, but the runes still breathed beneath the surface of history, whispering their lessons to those patient enough to listen not. And sometimes, in the stillness between day and night, when the world grew quiet and even the wind forgot its path, there was a feeling of presence moving through the air, a sense that someone was walking beside humanity, unseen, guiding without control, teaching without words. Not as a god above, but as wisdom within. Generations forgot the name Odin, but not the pattern he left behind. They taught their children to ask questions, to seek truth even when it hurt, to understand before judging. They didn't realize that these values were the last, fragments of a divine inheritance, the essence of a god who had sacrificed himself for knowledge. In the far north, where ice still whispered the songs of old, travelers found stones half buried in snow. Upon them were carved faint lines, the last visible runes. The explorers didn't know what they meant, but one of them, standing alone in the cold, swore he heard a voice in the wind saying, "Remember." He thought it was imagination, yet when he returned to his camp, he found the fire still burning despite the storm. The next morning, he carved those same lines into his journal, unknowingly preserving the last known symbols of the Allfather's mark. In time, those symbols would inspire countless stories, the myths of wizards, the legends of wanderers, the archetype of the wise man who sees what others cannot. Odin had become more than a god. He had become an idea, and ideas do not die. They transform. Even now, in the quiet corners of the modern world, his shadow lingers. In the curiosity that drives someone to open an old book. In the courage of a person who faces the truth rather than the comfort of lies. In the teacher who inspires, in the scientist who wonders, in the thinker who sacrifices certainty for discovery. These are the echoes of the Allfather's legacy, the living continuation of his sacrifice. And if you ever find yourself standing beneath an old tree during the storm, and the branches sway as if alive, listen closely. You might hear a voice, low and patient, carried by the wind through the leaves. It won't call itself Odin. It won't ask for worship or fear. It will simply say, "Seek, and you will understand what he meant all along, that wisdom was never about knowing everything. It was about daring to ask, no matter the cost." As centuries that followed turned the world into something even the gods would not recognize. Stone became steel, fire became electricity, words turned to data, and knowledge multiplied beyond imagination. Humanity had achieved what Odin once sought the mastery of learning. But where the Allfather had paid with his eye to see clearly, people now stared at endless light and saw almost nothing. They had built a world of knowing, yet forgotten the meaning of understanding. Cities stretched like constellations across the night. Machines hummed where once ravens flew. The stars no longer guided sailors. Satellites did. And yet, deep in the human heart, a quiet hunger remained, the same hunger that drove Odin to Mimir's well. The craving to know why, not just how. The need to find pattern within chaos, to give sense to existence. The questions had evolved, but the emptiness was the same. In libraries and laboratories, the new seekers appeared. They didn't wear armor or carry spears. They carried notebooks, telescopes, and endless curiosity. They dug into atoms, galaxies, and the recesses of the human mind. They built machines that could speak, think, even predict. Yet the more they discovered, the more they felt a strange void and echo of something ancient. Progress had given them information, but not wisdom. And somewhere within that void, Odin still walked. He had no body now, no throne, no crown. He existed in the spaces between thoughts, in the moment when a scientist pauses before writing an equation, in the silence between a philosopher's words. He was the whisper behind questions that begin with, "What if?" or "Why does it matter?" He was the pulse of curiosity, stripped of religion, reborn as reason. Humanity had forgotten his name, but not his essence. In a small university, tucked beneath the northern lights, a researcher worked late into the night. Her name was Elise. The clock read long past midnight, but she didn't notice. On her desk lay a photograph of an ancient stone tablet covered in symbols no one could translate. The lines were sharp, but strangely organic, as if they had grown rather than been carved. She traced one with her finger and felt an odd vibration, almost like breath. The runes were older than language, older than history. Some said they were myth. Elise didn't believe that. She whispered to herself, "If meaning once existed here, it can be found again." At that moment, the power flickered. The room dimmed. The wind outside howled. She turned her head, thinking she heard something in old, low voice. Not words exactly, but rhythm. The sound of thought taking shape. The sound of memory. When she looked back, one of the symbols on the screen had changed. A single mark glowed faintly, like an ember. Her rational mind rejected it, but another part of her, the part that still believed in stories told beside fire, felt calm. She opened her notebook and began to write. She didn't know why, but the symbols flowed from her hand as if guided by something unseen. Across the world, others felt similar moments. Painters, writers, scientists, dreamers. A flash of inspiration, an answer to a question that had haunted them for years. A sudden realization that connected two things that had never fit before. They didn't call it magic. They called it insight. But all insight has a source. In that quiet, ancient part of the universe where time folds in on itself, the echo of Odin smiled. His sacrifice had not been in vain. Knowledge was alive again, not in temples or battles, but in thought itself, He watched as humanity reached for stars, explored oceans, and decoded their own existence. He watched them repeat his cycle, gaining knowledge, losing humility, then rediscovering it again. It was the same rhythm, the eternal breath of creation and fall, progress and reflection. And though they no longer offered eyes or blood, they still paid the price. Sleepless nights, broken hearts, restless minds. Every generation sacrificed something for understanding. That was the nature of wisdom. It always cost. One evening, Elise returned to the same stone she had studied for years. The lab was quiet. Snow fell softly outside. She had finally translated a phrase, just a few words, but they changed everything. It read, "To see, one must give." She didn't know it, but she had found Odin's creed, the same truth he whispered to Yggdrasil before hanging himself upon it, the same law that shaped the universe. Nothing gained without loss, nothing learned without surrender. She closed her notebook, looked at the stars, and smiled. For the first time, she felt peace. The questions were no longer a burden, they were the bridge. Across the centuries, Odin's voice echoed, not as command, not as doctrine, but as quiet reassurance. Seek, question, give, learn. The words became the silent backbone of civilization. The scientists who doubted superstition were following his path. The teachers who nurtured minds instead of demanding obedience carried his legacy. The parents who taught their children patience before pride were unknowingly repeating his lessons. The wanderer had become everyone, yet Odin also saw the dangers. Humanity's hunger for knowledge could devour itself. He saw it in the bright machines that learned faster than their makers, in the restless pursuit of power disguised as progress. He had watched it before: knowledge without balance, creation without conscience. The same fire that gave life could burn it. The same wisdom that enlightened could destroy. And so, he whispered again into the minds of the dreamers, the poets, the philosophers. Remember the cost. Remember why you seek. In those who listened, the balance endured. They were few, but they were enough. A century later, a group of explorers discovered an untouched cave in the Arctic Circle. Inside, preserved by frost, they found ancient carvings, symbols etched deep into the rock. The runes glowed faintly when touched, pulsing with a strange, familiar rhythm. Scientists called it a geological anomaly. The older guides called it something else. "It's the breath of the Old One," said one, crossing himself without knowing why. "The God who gave everything to see." They left the cave undisturbed, and above the world, beyond stars and storms, in that quiet place where memory and time are the same. Odin stood once more beneath the branches of the world tree. The tree had grown taller than ever, reaching across galaxies now. The roots drank from black holes. The leaves shimmered with the light of newborn suns. He looked upon the universe with his single eye, not to rule it, but to witness it. The ravens still flew beside him, carrying thoughts and memories through eternity. He reached down, touched the fabric of space, and felt the heartbeat of humankind. They were still seeking. He smiled, and as the light of countless worlds reflected in his eye, Odin whispered one final truth, soft, steady, eternal. Wisdom never ends. It only changes who carries it.